Paul Thomas Anderson is one of those directors that I would hear a lot about. I would just hear his name a lot and I would get curious as to, what the deal was. I thought it could be fun to do a marathon of his films and kind of study them and just see what the through line is for the kind of movies that he likes to make. And that's why I watched all 10 of Paul Thomas Anderson's feature films. Just as a little project for myself, I wanted to see what I would notice, what I would find. So I started out with Hard Eight, his first feature-length movie. Debuts can be hit or miss, not everything can be Get Out. There's something about the directing of this movie that feels more Paul Thomas Anderson than the writing of the movie, if that makes sense. Visually, it has the shooting style and directing style that we'd see in his later films, where it's very energetic at times. It follows this gambler who's being mentored by this older guy, and it just kind of revolves around their relationship, which is kind of a seed of something that we see in all of his movies. His movies revolve around characters and their relationships with each other. At face value, that statement might sound kind of like, don't all movies revolve around characters? But there's a certain focus on the characters in Paul Thomas Anderson's movies that I've noticed that I haven't seen much anywhere else. The plot comes from the characters, I think PTA makes the most purely character-driven movies that I've ever seen. And sometimes plot can come as a secondary. And in something like The Master, in my opinion, the plot is sidelined to a fault. That was one of the movies of his that, just from my experience, I actually felt the lack of plot. And it kind of took me out of what was being focused on, which were these two characters. But yeah, one thing's for sure, PTA's movies always revolve around characters and their relationships with each other, whether that be for the better or for the worse. Now, Hard Eight was followed up by Boogie Nights in 1997, and this was one of the ones that I had already seen before starting this marathon. This is a very big movie, especially for someone to make so young. It's big and it's flashy. There's a lot going on and it's fast. It feels like it's always going like 100 miles an hour, which is an energy that kind of carries over into something like One Battle After Another. If you don't know, this revolves around a young guy who's an up-and-comer as he's rising to success in the porn industry. It's an ensemble movie, which is that's one thing to note, because this is one of the ones where I think the plot, so to speak, is really strong and really kind of aided by Paul Thomas Anderson's way of telling stories, if that makes sense. After seeing this movie, I was really interested in the kinds of characters that PTA writes. Dirk Diggler, he's such an ambitious guy, and he goes on such an epic journey through this industry, and I was really fascinated by him as a character, and all the other characters like Julianne Moore's character and Burt Reynolds' character. After watching this movie, I was really excited to see more of his characters. I really thought that was his strong suit, and it was something I was looking forward to seeing in his later films. Which then takes us to Magnolia. And I had heard a lot about Magnolia before I saw it. I already knew that it was very long and covers a huge amount of characters. Magnolia blew me away. I mean, it's a very strange movie to begin with. The way it captures the lives of so many different people. There's so much going on at once, but all of the lives of these people are connected in some way. As a concept for a movie, that's already very interesting. The story is big and emotional and immersive and expansive and just strange, and it grabs you. It really does. This is one of the movies where you can really tell that he's interested in human beings and their relationships with each other. And this is one of the movies where that idea is at its most extreme, so to speak. You're following like 20 different characters or something, and you're spending time with all of them in their lives, and you don't really get what they have to do with each other. You don't get the big picture until eventually he gives you the pieces. And my God, Tom Cruise. Forgive me, but I didn't know that Tom Cruise could act before I saw this movie. He is incredible. And that's another thing. Paul Thomas Anderson gets amazing performances out of his actors with the characters he allows them to embody. One of the things that I noticed, right off the bat from this one is that he's very good at doing big ensembles, which he carried over from Boogie Nights. Boogie Nights had a big ensemble, and then Magnolia, obviously, huge ensemble of characters, which he still handles pretty well. So from that, when you're going through his filmography, you see a path, and you see a trajectory, and you think you know where his movies are going to go. You think they're just going to keep getting bigger and bolder and even more quick and energetic. After Magnolia, he came out with Punch Drunk Love. You think his movies are just going to keep getting bigger, but this one dials it back a lot. This one's about one man and his relationship with one woman. This movie is just so different from what his filmography was like so far. You go from these huge, expansive stories about different kinds of people, granted, but then we're following this guy who's a loser, and he's basically doing a whole different genre at this point, because this is very much a romance movie. The atmosphere and the direction of this movie is so dreamy, and it really embraces the romance of these two people, and specifically how the main character, Barry, views his romance with this woman. I mean, another thing is, this was my first time seeing a dramatic performance from Adam Sandler, so for one thing, that's a really special thing about this movie, and I was very impressed. I think he gives a great performance. When you're doing a romance, centering the plot of the movie around a relationship, of course, makes a lot of sense. If you're doing a romance, the lack of plot doesn't stick out as much, because that's the story. The story is two people being in love. Again, PTA is great with characters. Everything revolves around the characters, and Barry is such an interesting character. I love him. He's probably one of, if not my favorite, Paul Thomas Anderson characters. He's very antisocial, he's very anxious, definitely needs therapy, but then he meets this woman, and he has a love in his life, which makes him stronger than anything you can imagine. He just has a way with characters. That's what he does. He just writes the most entertaining and interesting characters that you just love to watch. I just really love this one. This is one of my favorites of Paul Thomas Anderson. I think the kind of relationship and the kind of characters that the film revolves around works the best for PTA's style. This is the point where you kind of realize that he can do both. He can do the very big, energetic stories or the more intimate, quieter ones. And you kind of get curious about where he'll go next. Is he going to go back to the big stuff, or is he going to continue down this path of the smaller, more intimate stories? And There Will Be Blood, I would say, is on the trajectory of the more intimate kind of story. But this is also one of the ones that I had seen before doing this marathon. It's a hot take, but I didn't love this one as much as everyone else seems to. I wanted to. I had heard that it was one of the greatest movies of all time, and maybe I just overhyped it in my head. I definitely get why people love it so much, but I just don't think I'm quite there yet. This is probably his most famous movie. It follows Daniel Plainview, who's a man capitalizing on oil, and that's his goal. Very clearly, again, the star of the movie is the character. The movie is the character, and the character is the movie. I think he had a lot of fun diving into the psychology of Daniel Plainview, and also his rivalry with Eli Sunday. This one is definitely a slow burn, and it definitely took its time, and you can tell that he really just wanted to study the psychology of Daniel Plainview. It's definitely a character study, like I just said, but I feel like it's even more so focused on the character than his other films might have been. Daniel Plainview is absolutely a fascinating character. You know, he's ambitious. His ambition was something that I felt was kind of familiar, relating it back to a character like Dirk Diggler. They're obviously very different characters, but Paul Thomas Anderson is writing a character, a man, who's ambitious. He's exploring that idea of ambition again, but this time as a historical period drama through an oil man who's trying to capitalize on the oil of the land. And Daniel Plainview, he's a sick guy, you know? He's manipulative and he's mean and he doesn't care about anyone but himself. But I really like the way this movie goes into that and goes into what he wants and what he hates and what he loves and what makes him happy. All of that is very interesting and it's very captivating. And I understand why that makes this, in a lot of people's eyes, his best movie. And then you get to The Master, which I will admit is among my least favorites of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies. Yes, he writes these very fleshed out characters. These characters that are just very real people. He's very good at writing characters and creating characters. And the movie revolves around them and around their lives and around their relationships with each other. But it was this movie that made me realize that can be somewhat detrimental to a movie, or at least the way I'll get enjoyment out of a movie. Again, his movies revolve around the characters, for better or for worse. Plot is a thing that's kind of secondary, and the plot comes from their lives. The Master was the first time that kind of took me out of the movie. That the lack of plot was the most apparent and the most evident, and it really stuck out to me. And again, this is all just my personal opinion and what I kind of need to enjoy a movie. And this particular relationship and these particular characters that the movie evolves around, it wasn't really enough for me. Like There Will Be Blood, it really just simply follows the characters' lives, and it just follows them around. It just wants to see what they're doing, and it studies them and their psychology. And something about There Will Be Blood just worked a lot better for me than The Master, even though it's essentially the same style of storytelling. Then came Inherent Vice. This is also among the ones that I liked less. Interestingly, this may be one of his most plot-heavy movies because it follows a detective trying to solve a mystery. But somehow at points it also felt as unintentional as The Master. You know, during both Inherent Vice and The Master, I was just kind of questioning, like, what's going on here? You know, like, this is kind of dragging a little bit. Why do we need to be here? What's the point? Which is weird, because it's, again, it, like, switching genres again, he's doing a mystery, you know, plot's a big thing. There's no shortage of the wonderfully quirky characters that we know and love. He continues to be great at giving us characters that are just fun to observe. But yeah, this one didn't stand out to me as much. It's one of his more forgettable movies, I would say. That's just me personally. It might do better on a rewatch. But then we got Phantom Thread, which is one of my favorites. This one revolves around a dressmaker who kind of meets a muse of sorts. This one takes place in 50s London, I believe. Again, it's just so interesting to see the kinds of characters and the kinds of people that Paul Thomas Anderson is drawn to. You know, he could be interested in the life of a tailor in 1950s London, but also a stoner detective in the 70s, or a greedy oil man in the early 20th century. It's really interesting to see how he explores these different human ideas and human experiences through different eras and through many different kinds of people. On the kind of opposite side of The Master, I think this is one of the stories and one of like some of the characters and relationships that really bring out what's great about Paul Thomas Anderson. His movies are about two or more characters and their relationships with each other, and usually being at odds in some sort of way. The really quiet dialogue scenes between these two characters are captivating, and I think they bring out what makes Paul Thomas Anderson such a great writer and such a great director. This one's a really nice experience to watch. You know, the setting is very beautiful, and you enjoy being in the world of these two characters and just watching them kind of tear each other apart, you know, as quietly and as calmly as that may be. And after Phantom Thread, we got Licorice Pizza, which was another one of the movies that I had already seen. This is kind of on the same level as The Master for me, in that I thought the lack of plot was pretty apparent and kind of stuck out to me and affected the way that I enjoyed the movie. But again, you can't not appreciate his characters. Gary and Alana might be up there with my favorite characters Paul Thomas Anderson has ever written. They're just so entertaining and funny.
Can I touch them?
It was nice to see him go back into comedy after doing so many more serious dramas. And, you know, Inherent Vice was pretty funny, just following the stoner detective. It's nice to see him go back into comedy because he's really good at it. Licorice Pizza has a nice story, and the dynamic between the characters is really fun to watch. But ultimately, it's another one of those where I wasn't able to enjoy it as much as I would have liked to because of the lack of plot. And that takes us to the big one, One Battle After Another. This is probably his most plot-heavy movie. It follows a man whose daughter is kidnapped by a military general. This one leans more towards the kind of big, energetic ensemble movies from earlier in his career. And knowing that he's done multiple different genres before, you know, he's done the romance, he's done the comedy, he's done the historical drama, but there's quite a bit of action in this movie, and it's really cool to see his signature quirky style shine through with a story of this scale. He's proven time and time again that he knows how to write characters. These are some of the funniest characters I've seen from him. I mean, Bob, seeing what this guy, this washed up stoner revolutionary, gets himself into, it is just hilarious, and Leonardo DiCaprio does an incredible job. And Sensei, my goat, Benicio del Toro, is just amazing in this role as just the calm, kind of wise character, but it's Sensei. Sean Penn, Steve Lockjaw, that's a hell of a character right there. That's quite the character. He's a military general who wants to be a part of the KKK, but he has a fetish for black people. If that's not an interesting character, I don't know what is. They absolutely lean into the humor of his character and of all of the characters, but it's still a very serious and a very thrilling movie. Johnny Greenwood's score is a banger. It looks amazing. Performances are amazing. Not at all upset that this took home the Best Picture award. This movie, to me, is the absolute best of Paul Thomas Anderson. With his strong suit being his characters, as I've talked about before, that can fall off a little bit, but when you have the quirky, interesting, strong characters that he writes and a really exciting plot on top of that, I'm gonna love it. And that's why One Battle After Another is my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie. Altogether, having seen his entire filmography, my main takeaway is that he knows how to write characters. That's his thing. That's his best trait as a storyteller, is his ability to create characters. Whether we're just observing them going about their daily life or seeing them get thrown into crazy or funny situations, you can tell that's always the focus. I think that's what makes him one of the greats, is that he's one of the best character writers working in film today. You know, sometimes with the way he likes to tell stories. I've learned that not all of his movies are going to be for me. Some of the character studies that he does, some of the slower movies, just don't totally work for me, and that's okay. Because I know that at its best, he'll give me something like One Battle After Another. And at its worst, he'll give me something like The Master, which is still interesting. At the end of the day, Paul Thomas Anderson will, at the very least, always have something interesting to show you. Or, more specifically, someone interesting to show you.